ABC News. Around the world and into your home. The stories that touch your life. This is 2020 with Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, Sam Donaldson, Connie Chung, Charles Gibson, and Hugh Downs. Tonight, a harrowing tale. Young girls from suburbs and small towns sold into prostitution. Entrapped by smooth-talking pimps they meet at parties. For the first time, one girl steps out of the shadows to tell her story.
In my mind, it was like he really cared about me. It was like, wow, he really loves me.
She says he convinced her to run away with him and then sold her services for profit. How could this happen in the suburbs? Listen to a former pimp.
If the father was out of the home, you could step right in and be that father figure and be that, even no matter how perverted it was.
They're master manipulators, and they prey upon young minds. Could your daughter be at risk? Tom Jarrell with how innocent teenagers are being tricked into prostitution. Small town girls. Those stories tonight, Friday, March 5th, 1999, after this brief message. From ABC News in New York, Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters.
Good evening and welcome to 2020 Friday. We begin with a warning to parents about a brazen new threat to our teenage daughters. Now, you may be surprised to learn that pimps are moving in on suburbs and small towns looking for fresh-faced girls to turn into prostitutes. Girls so young and so naive that they often really don't know what's happening until it's too late.
Well, these men know just what to say to ensnare a vulnerable teenager. And tonight, Tom Jarrell will introduce you to a small-town girl who fell for the line. It took great courage for her to come forward. And even now, she fears for her safety. But she wants you to know how easily a nice girl can end up turning tricks on the streets.
There's an alarming new dimension to the world's oldest profession.
A pimp was talking, and he said, we know if we talk long enough and hard enough, we're going to capture these girls.
A sinister business of deliberate criminal child abuse.
They will recruit naive girls now, right out of high schools.
This flourishing trade in sex now involves recruitment of girls directly out of small-town America by savvy young men whose goal is profit through the manipulation of young minds and the destruction of young lives. According to this undercover vice detective,
it seems like the majority of the victims are from smaller towns or smaller suburbs, and I believe it maybe have something to do that they're more easily to coerce.
their targets used to be primarily found among runaways at bus stations in the big cities. Today, pimps go right to suburbia and small towns, blending in socially at teenage parties, making new friends at malls or playgrounds.
They can pick them out of a crowd, and they sweet talk them. They provide them with lots of attention that they're not getting otherwise in their life.
Experts believe that there are more than 300,000 teens involved in prostitution, and almost half of those were lured out of small town areas. And they tell us it's not just any kid who's vulnerable. It's usually kids with an absentee parent, kids who appear to be lonely, alienated, or depressed.
If the father was out of the home, or if there was an affair or divorce going on, those were the prime candidates.
It's like he had full control of me. I wasn't even me. It was like I couldn't think for myself. I was somebody's puppet.
Her name is Vicky. She's escaped the horror of being a teenage hooker. Her story is typical. She was raised by her mother in a modest home in a small town in Minnesota. She was lonely and had always dreamed of an exciting life in the big city. Then she met a young man at a neighborhood party.
You were 17 at the time.
Yeah.
And you said he was old.
Yeah, he was 33.
Vicky said despite his age, they had a lot in common. He swept her off her feet, promising her a new life together in Minneapolis, 360 miles away from home. She left her mother a note without even saying goodbye. But that first night, she was told, their money had run out, and her new boyfriend had a plan to get more.
He was like, "You're a really pretty girl." He's like, "I have something that would be cool for you to do." And I'm like, "What?"
Vicky says he claimed he could take her to a place where she would simply talk to lonely men and receive money in return.
So I said, "Oh, okay, well, do you have to do anything with the guys?" And he's like, no, you just have to talk to them and they'll give you money.
So far from home, she felt she had no choice but to go along. The very next morning, she said he took her to an apartment building where there were other young girls her age. There she realized he had led her into a trap.
It wasn't anything what he said it was. Guys would be coming in all day long. I ended up having to have sex with a lot of the guys.
Couldn't you have just walked away from it and left him?
I should have left, but I couldn't leave because I was scared.
Suddenly, Vicky says, the promise of a new life disappeared and was replaced by threats and the fear of violence against her and her family. Within days of leaving home, Vicky was a full-fledged teenage prostitute, servicing men for 8 hours a day. And yet, perhaps because of her problems at home, she found herself completely under her pimp spell.
I was having problems with my mom at the time. He knew exactly what to say to me, like, to make me, I guess, feel good inside. After a while, he'd tell me what I wanted to hear, tell me what he could do for me and stuff like that, and to me, it just sounded good.
Although the FBI Uniform Crime Report indicates arrest of juvenile female prostitutes has dropped 35%, social workers say the numbers, especially those involving small-town girls, have escalated. Dr. Lois Lee runs the nation's only safe house for teen prostitutes called Children of the Night.
The FBI tries to say that there are not very many child prostitutes, but they're not looking at the fact that most children who are arrested as prostitutes are arrested as adults, and they lie about their age, and no one's looking at that issue.
Ann Lee says prostitution has merely been moved indoors by clever pimps.
Was there a limit on the sex acts that you would expect these girls to do?
No. No, and sooner or later, you know, through manipulation, through their mind, putting them through such a horrifying experience, you could break them down to almost any level.
I ruined and messed up so many people's lives, and I didn't care about it.
Mark Jefferson has been there and done that. He was not Vicky's pimp, but was a pimp nonetheless, who at one point 15 years ago had numerous underage girls in his stable.
Because I would take these girls and I would trade favors to lawyers and governors and other things.
Today he is fully reformed, the pastor of a church. He counsels young people. He says the techniques he used back then work even better today on young suburban girls.
What character weakness would you exploit to get these girls to go into prostitution?
Well, I think a key that we have to understand in parenting is the father plays such an important role, especially through the ages of 10 through 18. And if the father was out of the home, you could step right in and be that father figure and be that, no matter how perverted it was or perverse it was, you know, they needed someone.
Gail Moffat has counseled Vicky as an advocate on behalf of teen prostitutes. Moffat never imagined that her divorce from her husband would make her own daughter susceptible to a pimp.
She was weak. She was very weak. She went to a teenage nightclub to go dancing with a bunch of kids from school, and he met her.
Moffat's college-bound daughter, Diana, was 16, a suburban high school cheerleader and basketball star. Her pimp used the classic techniques of pretending to be her friend and lover.
What happened to Diana?
She died. She was murdered.
Her body was found dumped along an interstate highway. She was not even 21. The young man she had fallen in love with was not charged with murdering her, but was convicted of prostituting Diana.
He even admitted it in a police report. He said, we knew she was ripe, and we were going to get her. And if I didn't get her, my friend was going to get her. So he zeroed in. He could see the weakness, and he zeroed in on it.
It wasn't long before Vicky was being sold through 3 states. Everywhere she went, she met girls like herself. She worked the streets of Chicago. She worked the strip clubs of Indiana, and says she was introduced to cocaine by her pimp.
They gave us cocaine the first time to dance, to get up on stage, because they said that it would make us feel better about ourselves.
Had you been into drugs as serious as cocaine before this, or was this the introduction?
No, that was the first time.
As time passed, Vicky says he used an important tactic that's very effective against small-town girls. Isolate them from their family.
He wouldn't let me call them because he told me they didn't care about me. Why are you going to call them? They don't care about you. Your mom doesn't care, your brother doesn't, and your sister doesn't. You know, so he'd tell me this, and after a while, it was like I just gave up.
God says he loves you so much. Take away the pain in the name of Jesus.
Jefferson, the pimp turned preacher, said he used similar tactics and worse.
You had enough control that you could keep them?
Yes, and the fear factor is always there too. I would put them through such harsh things. You know, maybe having, one girl because she spent some of the money, maybe having every man in the room sodomizing her and then urinating on her. Just everything just to degrade them.
And in my mind, it was like he really cared about me. It was like, wow, he really loves me, and he didn't.
Norma Hotelling is an ex-child prostitute who now runs a program called SAGE that provides counseling and services to prostitutes. She says the bond that pimps create is hard for these young girls to break.
They keep reliving the trauma over and over again, and they're very bonded to these perpetrators. They feel that they are the only people in the world who knows them, who accepts them, who loves them.
Pimps are master psychologists.
Dr. Lois Lee explained why some pimps target suburbia.
Pimps have had to move to the suburbs because of the gang activity. When gang members moved into the inner cities and took over a lot of the drug distribution, if they go out and steal a prostitute's money, what was a poor pimp to do? So they moved to the suburbs.
And the demand is growing.
Men drive the supply of prostitution. They like them young, they like them blonde, they like them blue-eyed, and they like them white. When I ask the men where these type of young girls would come from, they tell us the Midwest.
I didn't want this anymore. I didn't want this kind of life. I just wanted my mom.
After 4 months on the road, Vicki says she was exhausted from the beatings, the sexual and mental abuse. She said she somehow found the courage to call her mother.
My mom said, it's okay, I don't know what's happening to you. She's like, but I'll help you. She's like, just come home.
But before she did a brave and risky thing for a child or any prostitute to do. She had her pimp arrested for prostituting her. He pled not guilty, and now she'll have to tell her story in court. But ditching her past is not so easy.
I got some phone calls last week. The first ones were hang-up calls. The fourth call, somebody said, oh, you're pretty now, but you're not going to be pretty for long. The last call, they said, we're going to kill you, and they hung up.
But what Vicki and girls like her need, according to Gail Moffett, is support and encouragement.
Do not turn your back on them. That's the key. Do not turn your back on a friend. Reach out. If you have to, go to their family. I know detectives. I know judges. I know doctors that have had children that have got involved in prostitution. It can happen to anybody's child.
It's been 2 months. Vicki, now 18, is still tormented by the horror of that life, which is still a secret from her community. But for Vicki, telling her story for the first time is an important part of the healing process.
What you've been through is bold and revealing. It also will be shocking here in your hometown. Do you think the fact that this will appear on television and that you'll be still here, that it will affect your life?
Well, there's always going to be people who will think down of you, think that you're not worth saving, or there'll always be someone saying something negative about you, but if I can help anybody, to me it's worth it.
It is indeed. But Vicki is no longer living in her hometown. She recently moved to a safe house in another place because she fears for her life. Next week, she will be in court testifying against the man she says was her pimp. If he's convicted, prosecutors say that they hope to convince the judge to give him a long sentence.
Also, there are organizations that help teenagers who get into this kind of trouble. For more information, visit our website at abcnews.com. We'll be right back. And that is 2020 for tonight. We thank you for joining us. I'm Hugh Downs.
And I'm Barbara Walters, and for all of us here at 2020, have a good weekend and good night.
For the first time on a Sunday, the Oscar goes to ABC Sunday at the Oscars, March 21st.
Next at 11, a move to outlaw and even kill pit bulls in one of the largest capitals in the world.
And your child's shoes may contain high levels of lead. Details on a recall next.